For a year, he has waited. Training, learning, adapting. He has defended Pajama Sam's honor, ousted Jack Orlando as the horrendous crock that it was, and was maybe a little too hard on Jet Set Radio that one time. But now, GC must face its greatest trial yet.
Dragon Age 2 was balls.
I don't know who said that or how small they would have to be to sound so far away in a 10 by 18 room, but I agree.
If you like Western RPGs, no doubt you've heard of a company called BioWare. They've made a few things you might remember, like Baldur's Gate, Jade Empire, Knights of the Old Republic, Jade Empire, and more recently their flagship IPs, Mass Effect and Dragon Age. And Jade Empire. You think you can just make this and walk away from a sequel? I want a Jade Empire sequel, BioWare. Or at least make the PC version work on the updated tech, holy shit! Both Mass Effect 1 and Dragon Age Origins were released around the same time, and while Mass Effect was a game that explored different ideas and ways to innovate on the RPG style BioWare was becoming known for, Dragon Age Origins was a little less experimental and intended to be a spiritual successor to the Baldur's Gate games. A very spiritual successor, I guess you could say. Dragon Age Origins was amazing. It had good gameplay, a solid story. Yeah, it was a little rough around the edges, particularly around the teeth.
We had a good life and did all we could.
Oof. But it established an interesting world that you wanted to explore and learn more about, and the game satisfied that initial want in spades. And that's without mentioning the expansion and other DLCs that BioWare pumped out faster than a woman in her 22nd pregnancy. It was a promising start to an interesting franchise, as well as a promise from BioWare to create a contemporary RPG inspired by traditional RPG values in a way that ensured those values stayed relevant and appealed to new audiences. When I got my hands on Dragon Age Origins, I was in high school and not at all concerned about the quality of the games I played. It wasn't entirely about escapism or just passing time, but for the most part, all I cared about was pushing buttons and doing things. Once I started playing Origins, something in my brain switched on, and I started paying attention so hard to what was going on that my brain exploded. And when I finished putting it back together, I had done everything, and I mean everything Origins had to offer. So when I say I'm a big fan of Dragon Age, you can imagine how excited I was for a sequel that promised to be even better than the first. Dragon Age 2 came out a couple of years later, and truth be told, I didn't finish it. I don't even remember anything about it, but checking out the review scores seemed to indicate that it was pretty good. Yet user scores and most other people pan Dragon Age 2 as being the worst thing BioWare has ever made. Hey, that didn't come out for like another year. But we'll talk about it eventually. Oh yes, mark my words, the time will come. Of course, considering the split in opinions between critics and audiences, and since I am a fan, I decided to play it for the show. And it absolutely has nothing to do with needing to fill a world save state for Inquisition. Nope. No way.
I mean, Dragon Age 2 scored 8s or above with most critics. There's no way this game is as bad as everyone else says it is. Oh.
Dragon Age 2, where do I begin? Well, why don't we just start at the beginning? Of course it does. They've been doing alright this year, but EA's like a bad roommate you've had for a really long time. At this point, you're just happy when they go a day without shitting in the sink. Get acquainted with our main character, Garrett Hawk, and his twin siblings. Garrett Hawk and his little sister Bethany. Together with their mother, the three are running away from the Blight, a recurring apocalypse and the main focus of the first game. After fighting through a bunch of darkspawn, the creatures brought about by the Blight, he meets two other people. One of them dies, he makes a deal with a mysterious old lady, she turns into a dragon, and flies them across the ocean to a city named Kirkwall.
Bullshit. That's not what really happened.
Trust me, the way this game is going, I wish I was making that up. And that's it. That's the prologue. I know prologues are supposed to be short, but we've barely learned anything about our characters or what the game is going to be centered around. In Dragon Age Origins, we had an origin story, got conscripted into the Grey Wardens, met a king, saw him die, became the last of the Grey Wardens, and had an established, recognizable villain and overarching goal to complete. What did we do here? We fought a few battles, got some vague fetch quest of no real urgency, and show up to what I'm going to assume is our hub area. No stage has been set, no ultimate task to see through to the end. I mean, certainly the city of Kirkwall isn't going to be the entire scope of a whole game set in a world full of thriving nations, right?
Kirkwall was the champion's home now.
The sooner this is brought up, the better it'll sink in for you. The whole game takes place within the city of Kirkwall and its outskirts. Now, this isn't bad in concept alone. Lots of games take place entirely within city limits and make great use of cityscapes and urban environments, and that's fine. Dragon Age 2 is not fine. It isn't even remotely close to fine. Not only are there only about 6 different spaces in the entire game, but they all consist of the same pattern of big space at the center, lots of little corridors branching out. Every single area in Kirkwall feels the same. You move through it the same, they look the same, and they all take the same amount of time to explore. And no, changing your skybox and adding a nighttime filter does not constitute as a new area. And while we're on the subject of new areas, this game could really use some in the dungeon department. You want to know how many dungeons this game has? 3. Cave 1, Cave 2, and Cave 3. I'd ask you to pick one to go through, but I already used the Price is Right theme song twice this season, and if I do it again, the network will be on my ass. They each take 15 to 30 minutes to explore, and sometimes you'll be restricted to one portion of the dungeon by lazily placed walls, which feel more like a mercy killing than a design choice. I mean, come on, guys. I can see the door frame. The level design is not great, but why is this important? Because this game is 40 hours long. That's 40 hours of content squeezed into these very tiny, very cramped areas. And you would think, well, at least I don't have to comb over them again every single time I revisit. Think again. Every side quest is basically a phase of one of these dungeons and is repopulated with items and missable collectibles. On top of that, it isn't as if these dungeons are in the same place. No. These dungeons show up in geographically different locations, so you're led to believe that there's going to be something new to explore, but look, there's Steve, the skeleton you've become so familiar with you've given him a name. Exploring is fun because it's a form of traveling. You get to see new things, meet new people, get exposed to new challenges. It breaks routine and helps us escape the mundane. Having to revisit the same geometry over and over doesn't break routine. It reinforces it, and placing important things in places I've already been to 10 times before creates a tedium that no one should look forward to. Maybe I'm not explaining this as well as I should be. Imagine if someone asked you to help them find their wallet, and every time you found it, they would take their wallet and hide it somewhere in your room, then ask you to go find it again. Now imagine if you had to do that for 2 days straight. You would be pissed. And some people would say, well, they're collectibles, at least you get to keep them, or at least it's easy. Excuse me, sir, I don't mean to vehemently disagree with you, but who the fuck cares? This is not fun. This is 40 hours. 40 hours of walking through the same rooms over and over again and then paying $10 for DLC hoping for something new only for it to use base game textures, and everyone say hello to Steve, folks. In a few minutes we'll look just like him. I know. Wow, for calling himself GC positive, this guy sure is pretty negative. I'm going to address this right now because it's my season finale, and fuck you otherwise. Just because I swear a lot and I'm talking about a shitty game doesn't mean I'm not turning that into a positive experience. Positivity doesn't come from focusing solely on the good things. That's not positivity, that's denial. A lot of good can come from negative experiences, it just depends on how you use it. Learn more about your tastes, understand why you do or don't like a certain thing from the game you're playing, form better opinions, make some jokes with your friends, discuss it with other people, make a video on the internet. If you know how to use it, a bad experience isn't all that bad. But it sure as shit doesn't excuse this game. Usually, this is the part where I move on to the next bits of the story until I find a segue into something else, but we are dealing with a BioWare product, meaning there's a lot of words and way more of than in other games, not to mention all the side quests which take up most of your playtime. And if the side quests were more interesting, I would have gone into it as usual, but that's not the case. Almost every side quest in Dragon Age 2 is forgettable and terrible, unless you're interested in learning the various degrees of fetch questing. I'm going to break this down by the numbers for you, okay? There are 182 quests in Dragon Age 2 split into 4 categories: main, secondary, side, and companion quests. One of those is the prologue. 7 other quests are locked one way or another by choices you make in the main campaign. 11 can only be accessed depending on whether or not you imported a save from Dragon Age Origins, and mostly consist of a short cutscene and nothing more. 12 quests serve strictly as event flags. That means they don't actually serve any purpose aside from unlocking another quest, and do not contain any gameplay whatsoever. 40 quests are one-notes. It's a term I'm using to describe quests that consist of having one conversation with one NPC, then it ends and it doesn't chain into another quest. 45 of the remaining quests are your traditional fetch quests. Go here, grab or kill the thing, and come back. Most of the time, you don't even know you're on a fetch quest until you're in a dungeon, you pick up an item, and a quest starts instructing to take said item to a random person in town, and that's it. It doesn't open up a conversation, and it doesn't give you any interesting perks or rewards. Just some XP, some gold, and you never speak to that person ever again. And 6 of the remaining quests are exactly the same as 3 quests you get in Act 1 that are repeatable every act and not different from one another at all. There are little to no story elements to almost all of the quests I've mentioned that couldn't have been put together with another quest to make a tighter, more solid experience. Yeah, I know this is nitpicking at its finest, except it isn't. Shut up. Listen, there's a point to all of it. With all of these out of the way, that leaves 60 quests, a third of the number we started with that hold redeemable value, and I'm being generous, which means that 2/3 of the content in this game boils down to repetitive, padded, and often context-less busy work that has no intrinsic value other than, oh look, I'm pushing buttons. Because this game is I'm sorry, but who thought this was okay?
Jim.
Yes, Bill?
I have an awesome idea.
Okay, Bill.
You know the Dragon Age sequel we're making?
Yes, Bill?
Here's what we do. We have over 20 hours of content where the player gets to experience the exact same level over and over again, doing the exact same thing over and over again.
Bill?
Yeah?
That
Yeah,
idea
Yeah?
is stupid.
Well, how about this? We take my idea, right? And then double it. Oh my goodness! It would be preferable if I was not here at the moment.
This should go without saying, but content doesn't mean entertainment. Quality over quantity, which leads me to my next point. Everything I've mentioned up until now wouldn't actually be all that bad if the combat in Dragon Age 2 was interesting or fun to play. For me, environments and quest design supplement the more mechanical parts of gameplay, and the combat in Dragon Age 2 is...
It's bad. It's so bad. It's fucking terrible.
It's not necessarily the actual fighting bit that makes it suck. The controls are a little stiff and party members struggle to follow up attacks at times, but using abilities and coordinating your team is still fun and rarely an issue. Even the skill trees, in my opinion at least, have been streamlined in a good way and improved. Each skill tree is expansive and offers a lot of options in the role you want each character to play, and you can upgrade existing abilities to apply new effects to them. But that's as good as the silver lining gets, and the cloud it belongs to is big and gray and probably rains acid. I hate fighting wave after wave of enemies in most kinds of games, and Dragon Age 2 is infested with these kinds of fights. Most battles consist of fighting the same rogues and mages with a different label over their heads, and variety in monster and demon designs are extremely scarce. There is no variation in tactic when fighting any of these enemies because aside from soaking damage, they don't possess any unique abilities that make fighting one different from fighting another. That lack of variety also trickles into other parts of the game, specifically in regard to party customization. Don't you like finding gear as you explore and outfitting everyone in either cool looking or really powerful weapons and armor? Couldn't you say that's one of the many interesting and entertaining aspects of RPGs? Well, you can't customize any of your companions' armor sets, which is kind of counterintuitive seeing as everyone and their freshly dead grandmother drops loot in this game. You could equip it all to Hawk, but most pieces of armor in the game are locked to a specific class, and Hawk can only be one of them, so now I've got an inventory full of unique items that I can't use. Instead, companion armor is upgraded by purchasing invisible upgrades at vendors at the beginning of every major act in the game. So much for wanting to dress up my tank in hard-earned and visually different armor, guess I'll just sell sell it all for these soulless armor tickets. I've heard people say the inventory in Dragon Age 2 is easy to manage. Yeah, no shit. Since you can't maximize stats on companions, you just sell everything your main character isn't currently using, and since enemies aren't all that difficult to fight, you won't be stockpiling items anyway. You've just solved a minor concern by removing a very important feature.
Now, as you can see here, sir, we should...
Wait.
Oh, God.
I know you're about to end the meeting, but I've got an idea.
Sir, please, don't listen to him. He's known for sniffing glue during his lunch breaks. We'll call security.
Don't worry about that. I can save you time, labor, and cost.
Hold on a second. Zoom out.
Bear with me here. Dragon Age 2 Eternal Horde Mode.
There is so much in Dragon Age 2 that screams either laziness or cut corners or something. The overused environments, the repetition in questing and exploring, the boring enemy designs, the lack of things that were in the previous title in unabashed glory, and above all, one of the most confusing plots I've ever followed. First and foremost, the entire second act of the game is some kind of fandom event that comes and goes, and aside from once in the third act, is never talked about ever again. Okay, admittedly, I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. Dragon Age 2 tells a story about the rising tensions between mages and Templars, two interdependent factions who are increasingly at each other's throats all the time, and the eventual catastrophic event that pits one against the other. The story is told in 3 acts, and Act 1 does a fine job setting the stage. There are a few quests that set up the conflict, and many of your companions like Fenris, Aveline, and... have their own personal stake in it as well. Then Hawk, the main character who's just trying to get by as an immigrant, a literal outsider, stumbles across a magical idol that is clearly evil and nasty looking. Lo and behold, a friendly NPC betrays Hawk and runs off with the idol, leaving him to die in the deep ruins he found it in. The game has established our characters, the main plot, our main plot device, and incorporated a personal reason for our character to get involved, however weak that may be. Boom. End of Act 1. Good job. In Act 3, we meet the leaders of the Templar and Mage factions and become wrapped up in helping one of them gain the upper hand. As the story is building up to the climax, one of Hawk's companions,
Who's a fucking idiot?
commits an atrocity
That makes no fucking sense.
that finally breaks the uneasy truce, and the entire city of Kirkwall is engulfed in war. Our main plot device returns as an actually decent explanation for our villain's motives, and our protagonist is forced to get involved. Granted, there is some really stupid logic that comes into play that, if I explained it all, would make this video almost twice as long as it already is, but the day is done. Go home, game over. Except I skipped over Act 2, which has nothing to do with mages or Templars or anything related to the other 2 acts. Act 2 is about a shipwrecked crew of people called the Kunari, who aren't allowed to go home until they recover a missing relic that was stolen from them. The leader of these Kunari decides that the people of Kirkwall need his people's beliefs, and Hawk is, doesn't matter. Anything related to Act 1 or Act 3 is delegated to side quests of little to no consequence in Act 2. Sure, it does end with arguably the best boss fight in the whole game, but as I've already said, that isn't exactly difficult to achieve in Dragon Age 2. The only carryovers into Act 3 we get are Hawk's mother dying, and by defeating the Kunari, Hawk becomes someone the city can depend on. However, since nothing in Act 2 fits the overarching plot, it holds no significance and can therefore be too easily swapped out for any other threat you can think of.
Oh, Hawk, thank you for saving us from
The Nazis of World War II Germany.
3 years ago. Surely you will lend us your aid in these trying times.
In fact, Act 2 is so out there that by the time you've reached Act 3, you have so many questions that beg to be answered the closer and closer you get to the end. For instance, why is everyone's eye color either a shade of hazel or blue? Exactly how is it possible that a ship crew managed to overturn a whole city full of guards, Templars, and mages? If these two are so important to the story, why does it take almost 30 hours for them to make an actual appearance? Why is Act 3 so short? Why does the mage leader go nuts when he's been nothing but calm and collected the entire time he's been on screen? Why do your character models look so weird when they kiss? Who wrote this character? Who designed you? Of course, Dragon Age Origins wasn't exactly a sterling example of good writing, but this lacks cohesiveness, it lacks resolution, it lacks sense. And everything I've said piles up to present a game that doesn't feel like it was ready to be released when it did. And I can't help but think BioWare was aware of this, or worse, that they thought it was good to go. There's a couple of lines of dialogue lending credence to this idea, like,
"Very well. We'll investigate the mansion. Again."
And...
Another secret society meeting in a warehouse.
And...
What is this? I can feel it inside me.
So the writing sucks, the gameplay sucks, the exploration, terrible. Is there any redeemable quality to Dragon Age 2, or is it really that bad?
Well, here's the thing.
As a sequel, Dragon Age 2 is awful. It's inexcusable, irredeemable. The removal of features and diminished scope make way for bad storytelling and infuriating gameplay that shrivels in comparison to its predecessor. But on its own, the game isn't as egregious. It's still bad, it still suffers from all of the issues I've talked about, but it doesn't stand out as the infamous atrocity fans believe it to be. From any other perspective, it's just a bad game without any truly spectacular flaw to make it stand out among a crowd of mutually bad games. And it isn't completely bad. I have to admit, I kind of like the companions in Dragon Age 2. Certain company excluded. We never stray far from the city of Kirkwall, so your party members enjoy a permanent home where they can build relationships and lead personal lives outside of your sphere of influence. This makes them feel more realistic, and much to my own surprise, it was easy to sympathize despite not always agreeing with them. And yes, I am aware that the game's biggest fault lends itself to its only strength, but saying that makes up for it is like saying your new moped totally makes up for the car accident you were in a week ago. It doesn't, in case you were still trying to figure that one out. The companion approval system is also vastly improved from the first game. Each party member has a single meter that you can push towards either a friendship or rivalry depending on your dialogue choices. As you advance towards either a friendship or rivalry, you'll unlock special conversations, quests, and at a certain point your companion will earn a special passive that will help during combat. The intent behind this system is to get the player to answer dialogue choices the way they themselves would answer them, and to avoid having a player tiptoe around certain conversations to appease the companions they are with. It isn't as effective as it wants to be, but it's a step forward in a game that's doing backflips in the opposite direction. Companions even manage to set themselves apart from one another in combat, with each possessing their own unique skill tree to upgrade, and even though it makes decision making incredibly easy during leveling, the special abilities each companion has makes the player a lot more involved in party selection. Despite everything else surrounding them, the companion system and the companions themselves are alright. Except him. Get this guy to my fucking face. I don't even know why he's in this fucking game. Believe me, Dragon Age is a topic of conversation with which I can go on and on and on and on. Is Dragon Age 2 the worst thing I've ever played? Hell no, but it's shockingly bad if you're coming from the previous game or any other BioWare title before it. Yet it isn't bad enough to play through it to experience it for yourself. Seriously, unless you need game footage for something, Dragon Age 2 is better left untouched and observed from afar. Behind protective glass. On the moon. Instead, go play Inquisition, which I'm already about 100 hours into and is leagues better in every possible way. And don't worry, you don't have to play either of the first two games to enjoy it.
But as always, everybody, that's all the time I've got. My name's GC. Always remember that you are amazing and keep on.
Hold on a second. You didn't think I'd end my season finale without a big cheesy speech at the end, did ya? That has the most amazing sound to it. The season finale. For almost the whole year now, I've been making these silly videos, and even though I'm not as popular or experienced as the next person, I'm glad you took the time out of your day even once to visit my channel. I'm not good at being mushy, so I'll keep it short. Thank you. Knowing that someone finds these videos funny or informative or whatever enough to see them through makes me the happiest man alive. And in turn, it makes me want to keep on making you laugh or think or whatever it is you find in my videos. So from the bottom of my heart, once again, thank you. Thank you for encouraging me, and thank you for being here, because I wouldn't be here without you. Once again and always, my name's GC, you are amazing, and keep on
Play positive. See you next year.